Let everybody file in. There we go. All right. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Anna. I'm the Director of Planning for the City of Clayton. We appreciate you all being involved and participating in this engagement process. So tonight we are welcoming Southmoor, Forest Ridge, and Brentmoor Park to discuss the project with our institutional partners from Concordia Seminary and Washington University. So this is a part of a larger process. I just want to start by saying, for those of you, if you have not already checked out our engageclayton.com website with the project page about this, I would encourage you to do so and share that with your neighbors. There is a copy of the slides that were presented during the first large community meeting that was hosted at the high school, which gave a little bit more of an overview of the project and the sites. So if you weren't able to attend that meeting, I recommend going and looking on there. On the website, you can also register to be notified as additional information is posted there. So tonight we are going to go through a little bit quicker of a recap of the projects with the partners, and the goal is to have a good amount of input and discussion then at the end. So for those of you that are on Zoom, after the presentation, we'll allow you to speak. If you're here in the audience, there's a microphone that you can come up to share your comments, and we'll go back and forth. So the goal from that original meeting was to, on a larger scale, present the concept of this project, this kind of joint project that we have here. Our partnership with the city and our two institutions is kind of a unique approach to how projects have been run here in the city of Clayton, in that we're really, before a lot of detail is enacted in the plans, we're coming here to start that engagement process with the adjacent community members in the hopes that really we're all a part of the end result. So today, we're going to focus a little bit more on hearing the concerns, the questions, everything that's specific to your neighborhoods and how you relate to this project. If there are people from the neighborhoods outside of the three that we're targeting tonight, you are also welcome to make comments. But our goal here is to focus more on the impacts to Southmoor, Forest Ridge, and Brentmoor Park. So I'm going to go into a quick recap of the high level of the city's involvement in this process. So the purpose of zoning. Here on the map, you'll see in the kind of yellow colors, the lighter and darker yellow, this is an existing zoning map. So everything in those colors are single family residential zoning. And the institutions have that same zoning as the single family residential neighborhoods. The purpose of zoning covers a lot of aspects, but really it boils down to three important pieces. The use of land and buildings. So that's what is on the site. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it a cafe? How do those uses operate? And how do we need to regulate them? The intensity of the land use. So who's it bringing to the site? How many trips is it bringing? How many residents might be living there? What kind of noise or light might be generated by this use? The bulk of the use. So that's the actual physical development of the site. How big is the building? How tall is the building? How close is it to another building or to a property line? And through zoning and the regulations of those three aspects is really how we try to mitigate impacts to different types of land uses to each other, as well as the physical development. So a unique part of what we have here in Clayton is that we're regulating these larger institutions through single family zoning. Kind of what you find more common for these institutions is they'll have a specific institutional zoning that addresses the development patterns and the operations of that use specifically. What we do is we operate under a single family and have for many years a single family zoning. And then on top of that, we'll add a conditional use permit. So conditional use permits, these are uses that the community and the city recognizes as being important aspects for our community, and maybe the locations of them make sense within that zoning district, but inherently that use might come with some aspects that we want to mitigate that could impact the adjacent properties. So from our code, there's a few on the screen. It might be a use that's going to generate more traffic than another use in that zoning district. It might require more parking than is located usually on that site, or other impacts such as noise and pollutants. And so through a conditional use permit, we're saying this use is allowed, but we're going to place restrictions or conditions on the operation and development of that use, and to try to mitigate some of these impacts that are listed. And so through a conditional use permit, it's assigned to that specific development. And what that results in when you use a single family development zoning district with conditional use on top of it for institutions that develop kind of over time, you end up with a ton of conditional use permits and all these different conditions that are mitigating the impact of that one building they built at that certain time. So right now we have when WashU, somebody says, how is WashU regulated? What are they allowed to do on their South 40 campus? We have to go back and find a conditional use permit from whenever that building was built and see if it contradicts or works with a different conditional use permit that might have been issued and reviewed when they did a different development within the South 40. And then each time they want to make a change on the property, the neighborhood has to come out and try to figure out how that change relates to the single family regulations that are governing them. In the instance of smaller institutions, such as a local church, where you're not making a lot of changes to that physical development or operation every 10 years or so, the conditional use permit process works pretty well. So overlay districts come into play with that in mind. When Concordia and WashU came to us talking about the partnership that they have here and the plan for some of their sites, which they will go into, it became an opportunity for the city to say, from our perspective and our community's perspective, this is a great opportunity to look at an overlay district structure for the two different areas that WashU is interested in, as opposed to adding more layers of conditional use permits. So with an overlay district, that applies to a specific area of property. So we have plenty of overlay districts within the city right now. We have multiple over different sections of downtown. We have residential areas with overlay districts, such as the Clayton Gardens overlay district. There's even one on Clayton Road that impacts it. And so what an overlay district does is it says for this area, that specific area, we have certain regulations that we want to apply to modify what that existing zoning district is right now. So in this instance, the base zoning district is residential. The overlay is some regulations that we're putting on top of that would supersede those. And it would allow us to start establishing the box, the regulations that an institution would work within that are more specific to how an institution is developed and how it's used and operated, as opposed to trying to wedge the institutional operations into that residential box like we do right now. So a lot of people are probably wondering why do we need to change what the city's been doing for so long with conditional use permits? And really the overlay district will provide a lot of predictability for the community and for the landowners and the institutions who are developing it. So you'll know expectation wise, what is the building, what could the building be placed, what uses could be there, what operations such as limits to hours, conditions on lighting, all of that creates the predictability, and it allows the residents to not really have to play as much defense every time there's a change on the property, because these regulations stay in place. So overlay district parameters, how do we build an overlay district? So the first thing that we're thinking about as a city when we want to write zoning code is how do we preserve the neighborhood character and the quality of the residents nearby? So that's why we're having these engagement sessions with the residents to really understand what are your priorities in terms of the quality of your neighborhood, and then how can we write our zoning code to protect those? Based on a lot of public hearings and engagement just over time related to zoning codes, there are three kind of really common themes that you hear from residents, specifically when we're talking about protection of residential neighborhoods. We hear a lot that you don't want to see it. So what is the building height? How is there screening required for the different uses in the buildings to protect that view from your residential area? We don't want to hear it. So what are noise limits? How do we reduce the noise? Where are the different access points for vehicles? And we don't want traffic and parking in our neighborhoods. So how can we make sure there's capacity so that traffic and parking doesn't spill into the residential areas and impact that life? So with those considerations in mind, we've heard some very similar comments through our engagement so far, and we expect to hear that. And that will help us then write the code to specifically address those concerns. So as people are not always as familiar with what an overlay district looks like, this list here just kind of summarizes some of the headings, the sections of code that you would see within an overlay district. So the first ones kind of start out, you see those in most of your zoning codes. You know, why do we have the district? What's the purpose of it? And what property does it impact? So where have we applied this overlay district on within the city? And descriptions of the character. And that's really used then as well as the criteria for review when they actually apply for an application. These are the things that we'll look at as staff or as the plan commission or the board of aldermen, depending on what approval it is, to see if the project meets or is compliant. Site plan review and architectural review requirements. So what types of permits and reviews do they need to go through depending on what they're trying to construct on their site? Our tree and landscape regulations are similar to what we see now in most of our zoning districts. What are the tree canopy coverage requirements or replacements, et cetera? Off-street parking and loading, what do they need to provide on site based on the demand of those uses? The development standards, these are a big one for what we want to hear from the residents. So the coverage, what's the impervious coverage on the lot? Building density, what are the size of the buildings? How many units, maybe if it's a residential, how many units are allowed within that site? The height of buildings, our layout and orientation, that has to do with where the buildings are placed and what they are facing. So is the front door allowed to be in certain areas, front door, so to speak, of a building? Where does that need to go within a district? Our lighting regulations. So this can look at things like the brightness, the location of lights, the shielding that might be required from the lights to certain properties. Our setbacks are how close the buildings could be to each other or to a property line. Transition zones or buffers, you'll hear us talk about those a lot tonight. So that's that's even different from a building setback, because in the transition zone, we can address other uses in general. And that just creates kind of an additional separation or screening of uses. Grading and drainage is also very important. So how are we handling those on site? Accessory buildings, such as maybe a shed that would be adjacent to a field, where are those located? And then the uses come into play. So what are the primary uses allowed on site? Any regulations associated with those, or kind of the accessory uses that you might see in a property. So zoning wise, just to then kind of orient ourselves back onto a map, the zoning map here. We've highlighted what the proposed boundaries of two different overlay districts are. So to the north here is the South 40 campus. So that's the existing campus for Washington University, with Forsyth to the north, Big Bend here on the west, Wydown to the south. This district is highlighted, and you can see it's pretty, it's an existing area right now that you would recognize as the South 40 campus. The new overlay district that's creating kind of a newer zone is the result of Concordia Seminary's project, which they'll go into in more detail, that will allow them to kind of shift some housing to the east on their site to address some of the long-term projects that they've been planning. And then it opens up here on the western portion of Concordia Seminary's property, an area that we've designated as the proposed Big Bend overlay district that fronts right up to Big Bend. And this is the kind of the more of the change in use than what you guys are used to. If you would just come up to the microphone, otherwise those on Zoom can't hear what you're saying.
I don't want this to come off as an antagonist question.
Sure.
Am I correct to assume there will be an overlay district? And this is just the discussion, what will be permitted in that overlay district?
So to actually adopt the overlay district, we go through a text amendment process, which is a legislative decision. So the Board of Aldermen at the end of the day has to approve an overlay district. However, from the city's staff's perspective, this is a beneficial way for us to move forward with these institutions. We recognize, though, to make a successful overlay district, we need to do that in partnership with the community, which is why we're here now addressing that issue, to make sure that drafting this overlay district is something the community actually wants, and therefore the board would ultimately and hopefully adopt it.
So this is about shaping the district.
It is.
Not if the district will occur or not occur.
Right. At this point, we would like to hear more about shaping it. And I think it's not a foregone conclusion, because at the end of the day, the Board of Aldermen has the say. But hopefully, if we do this project well and together, it will result in a better position moving forward for all of the community residents. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it over to Mike with Concordia.
Thank you, Anna. We will be applying for a conditional use permit. Our project is pretty straightforward, pretty well developed. It's short term. This is not a series of projects for us. So that's why we're staying with a conditional use permit. But this is the campus of Concordia Seminary today, and it's bounded in green. It is about 72 acres. And it goes from Big Bend all the way on the west over to DeMun on the east. And what we're confronted with here is a couple of things on our campus. The first one is housing, and we want to renew our housing. We have a lot of housing issues. And the second one is that we're trying to create a better sense of community on the campus. And we intend to do that in tandem. Solving one problem will help solve the other. So let's start with what's on the west here, over on the left-hand side of this slide. This is our current married student housing. It was built in the late 1990s, and it is for a number of reasons at the end of its useful life. We have a couple of choices. One is to invest heavily into this housing to try to make it as good as we possibly can, but we're left with a number of the other problems that are inherent here, which is poor location and poor design. So our intention is to take this housing that's on the western side of the campus and move it much closer to the chapel. So move it east right here. And the chapel is this building right in the center of this picture. The second issue that we have is single student housing, which is right here. And these students are still living in 1920s dormitories, which is just unacceptable today. At least that's what they would tell you. And I would happen to agree with them. But our goal here is to build housing for them much further west, again, right around the chapel here. So when we get to addressing the community issue, we're going to have single students from over here and married students from over here, both located around the chapel. Right up here to the north of the chapel is where 12 of our faculty live. So not only do we have all of the students together, we'll have them close to faculty members, have them surrounding the chapel where seminary students should be, and much closer to classrooms and offices in the core of our campus. And this is what we intend to build. This is a two-dimensional view straight down at the chapel and the new housing surrounding the chapel. So over here to the west, northwest, and southwest of the chapel are 3 apartment buildings. They would each have 24 units in them. This is for married students, families. Directly north of the chapel are 9 townhomes. These are also for married students with larger families. And then directly south of the chapel would be a 75-unit apartment building for single students. We have directed the traffic to the perimeter of this entire site now and left the area inside of here without any roadways or parking or traffic, to build a little bit better community and to build a safer area for the students. What this looks like is that we're getting rid of about 75 units of married student housing today. We would also be getting rid of some of the faculty housing 1950s ranches that are in this depressed bowl up here, and building 81 units. So it's a pretty close 1-for-1 swap. The 75 units of student housing in here will replace our capacity in the historic campus. And then we would be adding about 25 units of parking spaces. So the intensity of our use will not increase because of this project. This is a side-by-side view of what this looks like today. You can see that there's a roadway around the west part of the chapel, and there's parking. This is all going to disappear and again be rerouted, as you can see over on the new view, all the way around. The presentation that was given at Clayton High School has lots of ground level views, and I don't have those today. I did bring one, and before I get there, I wanted to point out this little P down here in the corner of this slide is going to be the exact location that you're going to see. This is a 2-story parking deck And that's how we're going to accommodate the parking for most of the housing. But I wanted to point out, this is actually the view from ground level from that spot. So there's a pretty good change in grade from where that parking deck starts up at the top to where it is down here. And you would actually enter at grade up here and enter down on the first level of this at grade down here. So this is really a very unobtrusive parking garage. And then the last slide I have to show you is what we intend for the entire campus to look like at the end of this project, which is DeMun over here on the east, unchanged, not changed at all. The core of our campus, where there will be some significant renovation within these historic buildings, about 25,000 square feet of unused space in here right now that we will use to replace the office building that we have here, the new housing and parking deck. And this is the area that Washington University would be developing on the western portion of our campus. This piece of the slide here will be discussed in greater detail during the next part of this presentation. So with that, Mary Campbell.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Mary Campbell. I run real estate for Washington University. When Concordia approached us about using the western portion of their campus, it was a great opportunity for us to be able to think about relocating certain athletic facilities and rationalize other portions of our campus. And specifically what we'd like to think about is the baseball and softball field that are currently located on the South 40 at the very northern edge on Forsyth, and relocate those fields down to Concordia with potentially some additional uses, but those are two that we would, would be high on our wish list. And we've been working closely with two architecture and design firms on both the Big Bend overlay as well as the South 40 overlay. I have Tom Kirk here immediately to my left with Bolin Sawinski Jackson, and he is going to walk you through the Big Bend overlay. And Neil Chase with Trivers is then going to walk you through the South 40 overlay.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so this is sort of a graphic representation really of what everything Mary just spoke about, which is, we're looking down at a map of WashU's main campus, the Danforth campus, and that piece that Mary talked about, the South 40, just below that, that's where all of WashU's undergraduate housing is, in these two fields that Mary mentioned, the baseball and softball fields. And I'm going to move my microphone closer. Is that better? Yeah, thank you. So what's interesting about this conversation that occurred when Concordia decides to move their housing over, frees up this parcel that allows for this other zoning overlay to occur. And what, as Mary described, sort of this opportunity, right, to sort of move some of these fields so that the South 40, which Ross is going to talk about, can become more about a community of housing as opposed to this bifurcation of undergraduate housing and varsity sports. So before we jump into the Big Bend overlay, just stepping back, the South 40 is almost contiguous with WashU's main campus, right? It's just across Forsyth. The Big Bend district is not. So one of the things we're very interested in, WashU's interested in, Concordia is interested in, Fontbonne is even interested in, is how do we achieve that community, similar to what Mike's talking about, and this campus-like feel, i.e., I'm going to move this even closer. I'm going to tape it to my mouth. I.e., how do we allow for, on any campus, pedestrian access, bicycle access? Of course, we'll need some vehicle access in order to get folks there by car and service this. So what you're looking at here are just some diagrams of how we can use the South 40 overlay to help bring pedestrian bikes down along Big Bend to the Big Bend overlay district. And you'll see the blue line. Yes, question from the audience. So the question is the parking lot that's existing now on Concordia's campus, which is Fontbonne is using, is that included in the overlay? That would go away as part of the overlay. Correct. Yes, that parking lot would go away. That wouldn't be part of the overlay.
The boundary of the overlay includes that parking lot.
Well, I'll put it this way, that parking lot is within the overlay physically. In the future, there will need to be parking. I can't imagine that it will be exactly where that parking is right now. That was very much a circumstance of Concordia and Fontbonne. So yes, can you see my cursor up on the screen? Here's the entrance from Big Bend, kind of across from Southmoor. Here's that parking lot right here, just below the Zoom question mark, Zoom hand. Well, you can see it's within the boundary, and the boundary is that black dash line. Yeah. Correct. Correct. That's a good assumption. Well, the reason I say that, sorry, I'm going to get to your question in a second. Concordia is way ahead of us. You saw they have renderings. I mean, you can see their buildings. We're way behind them in terms of what's going to be on this site. So, we don't actually know, we don't have renderings, we don't have plans yet, but we wanted to get going with this conversation because the overlay needs to be created in partnership with Clayton. But yeah.
Ask your question in the microphone.
Oh, sure. One of the challenges for myself and perhaps other residents on Southmoor, we don't really know what we're responding to. That parking lot, for example, has been a great problem, the entrance and exit, constant traffic violations. But we don't have enough information to respond to what you're asking us. Sure, we're concerned about all the things that Ann very nicely listed, lighting, elevations, all of that. But it's hard for us to tell you what we're interested beyond that because there's really nothing for us yet that I can see specifically that you're asking us to respond to.
That's true. And I understand how frustrating this is because we're not going to give you, you're looking for something really concrete and we don't have it yet. However, just the fact that of us hearing exactly what you're experiencing and just us knowing that before Tom and his team starts to design anything and before the city writes the regulation is the purpose of this meeting. So we actually we're not going to have the answer tonight. And I know that's going to be frustrating, but we need to hear about the issues and the concerns. And we also need to hear, you live there. Are there ideas you have to mitigate any of these concerns? Is there an alternative for, we have a placeholder, this blue arrow for an entrance across from Oak Knoll Park. We haven't done any study on that yet. However, you're going to have a viewpoint and please tell us what it is and tell us what's wrong with it, where it should be, what doesn't work for you now. We've certainly heard over the last many days about what a giant problem Big Bend is. We'd like to hear more about that. Honestly, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a, give and take here.
Yeah, Mary, thanks for pointing that out. You can see that blue line hopefully up on the screen right here, across from Oak Knoll. That is our placeholder for where we thought vehicle access would make the most sense. Either is fine. I think it's
It's just,
I think we just
if
want
you
to make
wanna give
sure there's
feedback
people
while
on
we're
Zoom.
talking, you please come to the microphone.
Sure. Obviously, I have an opinion on all this. I've lived on Southmoor for 47 years. One of the big problems, as you noted, is Big Bend. It has been exacerbated by the new entrance that Fontbonne received when they built that parking lot. Originally, the city of Clayton promised a traffic signal at that new entrance if the number of traffic accidents increased. Clayton later said they should not have made that promise. They could not fulfill it. Their students that use that entrance constantly make illegal turns to the south. The number of accidents is more than you would expect, but it also makes it very difficult for Southmoor residents to make a left turn at that north entrance without getting rear-ended. So traffic is a tremendous concern to the neighborhood. And Big Bend is St. Louis County roadway. I don't know how much input they are going to have in this discussion as well.
So we actually, just so you know, normally the county, it is a county road. And normally they don't provide feedback until you go to them with a site plan. You know, we would have to get a real specific site plan, submit it to Clayton, and then we go have their engineers opine on it. We have pushed them and went to see them for the first meeting this week, and will now continue meeting with them. They are going to let us just have a dialogue and start giving us some more concrete feedback, knowing we don't have a plan yet. So that's really good. I think that way, as we continue our dialogue and we can bring them some more hypothetical program options and say, react to it and tell us what you would have us do with Big Bend. And then we'll all be able to have that information. So it'll be less of a black box as we move forward. So that's what our hope is by starting the dialogue now with the county. And I'm just curious, would a traffic light, is that a good thing in your mind? Would that have helped a lot? Or would you view that as a bad thing?
Yeah, he's gonna bring a microphone out to pass around for you all. If you just 1 second.
I think you also had a question too. Yeah. Was it answered?
1 second. He'll
Yeah, no, I
pass.
just wanted to make sure we kept
Yeah.
kept track.
Yeah.
Mary, this is probably a question for you. The CBC campus with its playing fields.
Yeah.
What role isn't that playing in this overall scheme?
Yeah, so I should have mentioned that. It would also be on my wish list. Right now, we can't talk about the old CBC site because I've got, almost every club sport has some presence either in the gym or in the cafeteria, the western portion of the campus that is the quote unquote new addition. And the field. We would love to relocate these athletic uses to Concordia. That would allow us then to start a dialogue with the community and with the city about other options for that site. And because right now we don't have anywhere to put the club sports.
Which then leads to the follow-up question. If the sports that will now be on this Big Bend site, is that limited from 7 in the morning to 6 in the evening, from 7 in the morning till 12 midnight? I'm trying to get a sense of the use, the capacity of the use, the size of this use, which clearly has an impact on our neighborhood as well as the neighborhood to the south.
So that will all be regulated by the overlay. I can give you now just historic information on what what the hours are and the usages at the baseball and softball field and South Campus. I'll tell you from a number of people, we explored that a little bit. And if we talk about the varsity fields, We are very conservative, meaning we look at homecoming, rival team, we make it to postseason. They have all in, that would be a large crowd for either softball or baseball, and that would not exceed about 250 people. So that's sort of a maximum crowd you could expect. So the hours of usage right now, they're after, say, 4 o'clock after school. Right now, things wind down no later than 10:30. And that, again, that's something that, as far as the lights, when the lights can be on and when the facilities can be open, we would certainly expect that to be addressed in the overlay.
So this is something that wasn't mentioned in your top 3 list, but I would add it as number 4 as a consideration. I'm curious what sustainability standards the university has in place for new construction, specifically fields and developments like this.
Yeah, that's a great question. The university does have their own sort of goals and objectives with all of their projects in terms of sustainability, in terms of conservation of water, conservation of energy, materials, and now it's getting into carbon tracking. So it's looking at sort of the carbon that's embodied in material. So it's this very holistic approach, so I think that's sort of a foundational aspect of anything the university does. Currently, they're now both turf, synthetic turf, which means synthetic turf over a very large basin of crushed rock and sand, and it takes all the water and holds it and then releases it. So it's actually, these fields are pretty amazing today. They're kind of technologically advanced, right? I mean, they can kind of yeah, so you might be referring to the fill has historically been put into. Okay. Yeah.
She's asked that, for those on Zoom, she's asked that more consideration is given to the sustainability design of the fields.
Could I go back to traffic? I also live at Southmoor, at the south end. And I would ask that serious consideration be given to no access from the southbound direction. The Fontbonne parking lot is well signed, indicating that a left turn out or a left turn in is illegal. And you can stand there on any given day and just count the number of people who make left turns. And obscene gestures if you're watching them. So if you look at the Walgreens solution, in which you can only enter that parking lot from Big Bend from the east lanes, and then you leave that area either by going up to the alley or up to, I guess that's Seminary there, and making the right turn and then putting yourself back onto Clayton, at which point you can make a left turn if you need to go south on Big Bend with an arrowed light. But I would invite you to look carefully at creating an additional traffic. I'll say congestion across from Oak Knoll at the beginning of the day when childcare patrons are coming in, at the end of the day when they're leaving. there's a lot of activity there. And those times might well overlay with what you're proposing to do. I just think you really have to figure out how to not have left turns going into that area off of Big Bend or coming out of it. And it might help if some of what is presently Concordia land, what will become the part of the overlay, where the street were widened to make a right-hand turn lane on, what is that? Help me out, Chuck. Is that on the east side of Big Bend, the northbound lanes into which you would have traffic coming? Am I making sense? Mary's nodding. Okay. And I guess I would also encourage you to look at encouraging foot traffic from the South 40 along Dartford as well. Now that means that people are going to walk across the Concordia, part of the Concordia campus, or maybe they're just going to access the road that circumnavigates Concordia's new campus once you get past the little, the Ramblers. But I just don't, there will be times when there's no need for a light at the north end of Southmoor because there's no traffic. There are periods during the day where, it could be a solution, but there will be periods where everybody's kind of stopped for no apparent reason. But southbound turns will be a problem if there's, if there are 250 people there and that makes 100 cars leaving at the same time, it will be a mess. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just mention that we will be doing traffic impact analysis with St. Louis County as well as the city's traffic engineers. So very valid concerns, and we'll make sure that those are all reviewed within that scope. If you don't mind, we do have a lot of hands online that have been waiting patiently. So I think it'd be great if we allow Tom and Neil to just go through these last few slides, and then we'll open it up for questions again.
Thanks, Anna. So we already looked at the existing plan. I don't think we need to spend much time on this, but this is just a blow up of the actual, it's about 28-acre site. Again, we're far behind Concordia in terms of development, but one of the things we want to point out is, all this because you live there, the perimeter of this site has a wonderful mature landscape at majority of the perimeter. There's some places that are open near San Benito, but the whole point of the overlay is to also look to preserve the characteristic of this site, of this neighborhood. So you can see in this drawing, we're sort of highlighting areas where we'd want to maintain that landscape that's existing. The darker green are areas where because we're bumping up against the residential as opposed to either just a road or Concordia or Fontbonne, which are institutional, we'd want to make sure we increase or add to that buffer. So that's what the darker green is. And then these athletics facilities and fields would be sort of internal to all of that in the site. So, stay tuned for more information about that. But that's sort of the diagram of what the overlay would look like. And I'll hand it over to my colleague here to go through the South 40.
Thanks, Tom. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So similar to what Tom described, you're looking at the existing condition here. The emphasis of this drawing is to understand the boundaries along Forsyth to the north, Big Bend to the west, Wydown to the south, and the adjacent properties to the east. And the important thing to note here is that the existing setbacks are determined by the distance of the existing buildings relative to the property line. So we have 60 feet to the north, 60 feet to the west, 50 feet to the south, and 50 feet to the east. Oh, thanks, Mary. So the fields in question that we're talking about moving south to the Big Bend overlay district are the two fields here in the northwest corner of the South 40. this slide is talking about existing edges. The previous presentation included several videos. We've taken those out today, but this slide still tries to give you an impression of the current setbacks and buffers. If you notice, the buffers currently have lots of beautiful vegetation that we've been talking about tonight. The intent is for that to remain as is. And so finally here, we're looking at a very early proposed condition for the South 40 overlay district. In the heavy green, you can see that existing buffer condition that will remain as it is today. That experience will remain. In the pink color, the slide's also talking about pedestrian nodes and major pedestrian circulation. And the big idea with this is that this concept connects the South 40 overlay district, both south to the Big Bend overlay district and to the north to the Danforth campus. Also represented here are a very early indication of what the housing might look like on the slide, as if this overlay district were primarily a housing district. That is all. So I'll turn it back over to Anna for a wrap up.
Sure.
A node, that's a planning term, kind of a central hub where several circulation points come together.
Okay, so just to then wrap up and kind of reiterate where we are right now and where we're going. So we are in this gather input stage right now, talking with all the individual communities, having the larger group. Again, engageclayton.com. Feel free to visit there, see the presentations, recording of all the neighborhood meetings will be added, and you can provide feedback directly through that site as well. And then based on this feedback, really what we're going to do is use that to inform the draft regulations that we write. So understanding your priorities, your concerns, that's how we'll write the code. Then when we actually create this draft, we'll again come back to the community to get feedback from how we've drafted the code and what you see and potential changes before ultimately starting the official adoption process, which includes public hearings. So before a text amendment, essentially there's kind of two steps to what we're going to do here with an overlay district. There's a text amendment process where you actually add these overlay district regulations into our adopted ordinances, into our zoning code. And then we also apply that actual overlay district to this property through within our zoning map. So that's more of kind of the rezoning aspect of it. So both of those processes require public hearings before our plan commission, who then ultimately make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen. And again, there's a public hearing and community input before the Board of Aldermen makes a decision. So there is a lot of aspects here that will allow for continued engagement and dialogue with the community and with residents as we start to build these elements in place. And then I'll also note both plans, the conditional use permit that Concordia's project would require, as well as whatever future development comes from Washington University's side, would require their own approval process. So once we put the Concordia's plan is to probably, or kind of concurrently with our overlay districts, go through the process of their conditional use permit, which also requires public hearings. So again, there's input, and that will be with their detailed plans, site plans, everything else. And then similar process would happen with the development of the site much further down the road for Washington University. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let some of our audience who's been waiting, here we go, ask some questions. If anybody in the audience, if you could either come up to the mic or raise your hand, and Ryan will bring you a microphone so that you can speak in the audience here. All right, so we have one hand up. And you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm Ann Martin. I'm a resident in Tuscany Park, and I'm thinking I got you all beat on experience with Big Bend and the county highway department and 70 years living next to Concordia. We've been through it, or I've been through all this before. and I kind of don't think this has anything to do with Concordia and WashU about athletic fields. The area that they're designating closer to the south end that they're designating for athletic fields is, of all the area on their campus, the least likely, the most expensive place to convert into playing fields. It's a huge natural ravine with existing drainage problems, a detention basin, and it's the least level patch of ground on the entire campus. They'd have to first clear the area of all vegetation. And while I appreciate your talk about maintaining trees and bushes, and it's a little disingenuous, I think. That area would be cleared. And the next thing they'd have to do is get it flat, which means moving metric tons of soil around that area just to get it flat, then to get it level for playing fields. Again, what happens to the natural flow of water there? That all actually comes down into Tuscany Park when it's disturbed, detention basin or not. You're going to eliminate that, trying to get that area flat. My guess is that what really is going on here, that WashU wants to clear and level that section of Concordia to eventually, years down the road, have it open as a useful building site years down the road. It's exactly what they're doing with the fields north of here. It is a nice level flat area. What are they going to do? They're going to build buildings on it. WashU can easily buy and sell Fonfon and Concordia any day. I assume they'll take over much of Fonfon there, and much anywhere they can get ownership of more useful, buildable land extending from Forest Park Parkway all the way to Clayton Road and east to Skinker. They've already done it on Forsyth, to houses that kind of look like your houses in Southmoor and Brentmoor. That's all WashU. They've done it on both sides, north and south on Forsyth of Big Bend. There's frat houses around there. CBC, that's already taken over. And also south of Arundel, Ellenwood, and Skinker Bolivar, which has become student housing. The DeMun area near me is mostly R4 that could also easily fall to WashU, just like Skinker, DeBolivar, and the area north of Delmar. And I've been through conditional use permits when land was taken away from Tuscany Park to widen Big Bend. Conditional uses promised tree-lined street like we used to have. It used to look actually years ago like Skinker, and there were plane trees, old sycamores lining it. When we were going over all this with Concordia with their married student housing, which we had great concerns about because it was built on to a density that wouldn't satisfy any zoning in Clayton. The question was, what do you do with it when you're not going to use it anymore? Well, it turns out now we'll make it a big building site. The county highway wouldn't let, at that time when Concordia wanted to build their giant office building, which is now at Lindbergh and 44, there was so much ingress and egress, and that's such a dangerous place already to come in and out. The county highway department wouldn't let them do it. And I can tell you with the exiting and ingress and egress from Fonfon to Big Bend, I'm imagining you in Southmoor experience exactly what we are in Tuscany. It's just a big U-turn ramp. And if
Thank you very much for your comments. I'm happy to meet with you separately to discuss this further, but I'm going to allow some of the residents that are here in the room that have not had a chance to speak yet about their neighborhood, have a chance before we run out of time. But please feel free to contact me and we can discuss this further outside of this meeting. But thank you very much for participating in the process. Anyone? You can go, yeah, Ryan.
She does raise a very interesting question about grading and existing tree canopy. And it's unclear from your slides, you may not have that information, but is it wishful thinking for the dark green areas that you've outlined that those will in fact exist, given, as she correctly observed, the variation in elevations that exist on the site?
The short answer is yes, they will exist. It would be, we can't disassociate this plot from the grading that it abuts. You couldn't, there is a lot of topography. It's a great point. We're well aware of that. It's challenging, but the site is going to have to be terraced. You can't just level the whole thing, as was mentioned. That wouldn't actually work for all kinds of reasons. So, and to answer your main question though, the objective is to leave the landscapes at the border, at the perimeter that exist.
Several observations. One, 60-foot barriers is not very far. 60 foot is a very short distance. So there's a great concern, at least on my part, about what we will see and experience. The other is I recognize this is a listening session, but I suddenly hear retaining walls. I hear terracing. I can only begin to imagine, not that you mean to, but you can create a very unattractive playing field situation. And there's no information from us to positively respond, only to assume the worst.
Sally, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is the first time I've been able to get into the meeting, so I've attended 3 so far. So here, one of my concerns, I'm in the DeMund neighborhood and I was there but couldn't participate, is the whole water situation. I mean, I think that there has been a kind of oh, this is no big deal. These are just playing fields. But then last night there was a discussion, well, there may be a building with 6 basketball courts. Well, you have showers and everything. I mean, we're living in High Point. We have no water as it is. And there's this whole infrastructure about water, about, we're in 100-year-old pipes. And I think the attitude that I've heard is this is no big deal. This is, we're just adding some athletic fields. Don't worry about it. This is no big deal. And yet, if you're a resident, you have traffic, you have the noise, you have the lights, you have the, all of a sudden you have water, you have runoff. And the earlier speaker, the woman, talked about the fact, I know I walk my dog every day in this area. There's got to be tremendous work to make this area a flat area for athletic fields. And then last night, you were talking about a building with 6 basketball courts. I did not hear that mentioned tonight, but all of a sudden you got water usage. I mean, currently you have a soccer field that's used for you know, the seminary plays soccer with various teams. There's no showers, there's no anything like that. And, you know, I just think that what makes me insecure about this whole process is that I feel like what I've heard for 3 meetings is kind of, you know, this is really not a big deal. You know, we're just adding a couple of athletic fields, but then you're also talking about a building, and, you know, and we don't know about water usage. We don't know about sewer usage. I for sure believe that the current situation of the water and sewage, which is old systems in this whole area, can't handle what's coming, what's going to hit. And I just feel like I would feel better about the entire process if people would just live up to the thing that this is a big deal, and stop, you know, kind of underplaying the impacts, because I think the impacts are going to be big in a lot of different areas. And what I keep hearing from this panel is, okay, you know, this is just adding some you know, athletic fields. No, you're going to be adding showers, you're going to be adding a gym, you're going to be adding a lot of traffic and lights to this area. And so I just ask for some real honesty here, instead of kind of what we're getting, which I feel like is a snow job to sell it to the community. And I have to be quite honest and say that I feel like the Clayton representation is all in for Concordia and WashU, and not for the residents of this area. We're the taxpayers, we're the people that voted you into office. And I feel like we're not really being represented at the table. I feel like everybody is, sorry to say, gotten in bed with WashU and Concordia and fallen in love with this project, and to hell with the neighborhood. And that's all I have to say.
Sally, thank you for your comments. I will just say that the city very much recognizes that this is a big project. This is a change for many of the neighborhoods that have been there for an extended period of time. And that is exactly why we are going through this process differently than the city ever has in the past with Washington University. So thank you for sharing those comments. And again, please, you know, continue even after this meeting to share thoughts, ideas, concerns. The more I hear from you, the better we're going to be able to write a code that is protecting the neighborhoods. And so that is, at the end of the day, just like was on the slide, from our perspective as the city staff, one of our biggest priorities is to make sure that we're protecting the character and the quality of the neighborhoods. So thank you very much for participating, Sally.
And if you don't mind, if I could just clarify, I think actually a member of the audience mentioned there would be a building with 6 basketball courts on it. There may be a building with showers that go along with athletic fields, but there's already a building with showers on the site. Concordia has their athletic facility on the site. So you know, this would not be, you know, this would be maybe in a different location. It would be new and modern, but, you know, I just wanted to point that out and also clarify that we certainly didn't present you know, built facility with 6 basketball courts in it. I want to be really clear about that.
Yeah, so they asked to see where the existing facilities are on the slide. So this is the existing field house for the facility, and then obviously all the housing that's located on here as well also is connected. And I will just mention too, the concerns about infrastructure and capacity as it relates to sewers, stormwater, electric, all of those aspects are very important. What we're talking about here tonight in any zoning we enact does not negate the process they will have to go through with all of the utility companies in order to provide enough capacity. So they might have to do improvements to some of those different systems that might be required. So Ameren, Missouri American Water, and Metropolitan Sewer District all have their individual requirements, permit review processes that they will have to go through. Yes, so he asked about the buildings being removed at this, under this proposal, all of the buildings, I believe that you see on this picture within the Big Bend overlay district would be removed. All right, we
believe
have
that-
Jane on. Jane, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I keep coming back to the question of how does this project benefit the city of Clayton and its residents? I mean, it's just a simple question. I'm just kind of curious. What does this project do for the residents and the city of Clayton?
Sure, and that's a great question. There's a lot of reasons why I think that this is beneficial outside of knowing exactly what the aspects of the WashU development incur. I think just the fact of creating an overlay district to help regulate these uses is beneficial to the city and to the residents that live next door. Right now, as I mentioned, with the conditional use permit process, the site is very much regulated the same way that an R2 lot, a single family lot that on average is 60 feet wide. So just simply applying the setbacks, that's why on this screen right here, you see 15-foot setback requirements for buildings. That's because that's the setback established within an R2 zoning district. So by applying an overlay district, we can create regulations that make more sense, like a setback that relates to the larger intensity of an operation. That's something that an institution is doing, as opposed to trying to use the R2 district regulations. So I think this is where we can establish those regulations ahead of time, as opposed to saying, okay, they're building one field. How do we regulate this one field? 10 years later, they build the second field. How do we regulate the second field? So we're trying to go through a process of creating upfront the expectations that our community has for how the site will be developed that directly relates to the intensity and the use of the institution, as opposed to thinking about it first with single families. That's one. I think the second part is outside of the process. So outside of what they propose, this is a great opportunity for us to be a part of the conversation much further in advance of the actual development plan than we probably ever have been with the institutions. So the fact that we're at the table right now with our voice, I think, is a really beneficial way to move forward within our community. And then also, I think it's really great that we're able to have a reconfiguration of uses on property that's already tax exempt. So we're talking about reorganizing the uses in a way that doesn't extend and purchase any new property within our community, because I know that is also something that's a priority of our residents.
In the context of an overlay district, once, particularly the Big Bend, the proposed athletic area, once an overlay district is established based on certain presentations for types of use, athletic facilities, for example, what limitations are there on a reuse or a change of use, substantial change of use? I'm not talking about changing from a clay court to a hard surface tennis court. I'm talking about changing it from an athletic area to more housing, for example, for graduate students or something.
Yeah.
Some fundamental change. What are the limitations in the nature of an overlay area that protect or prevent that?
Right, that's a great question. The way an overlay district is written, it actually kind of supersedes, it modifies whatever the base zoning district is. So in this case, with the Big Bend overlay district, we would want to write it in a way that's restricting other uses that we have not anticipated based on that plan. So within the overlay district slide, where I kind of outlined some of the sections that you would see within an overlay district regulation, I'll just go back to it really quickly here. So you can see that we would have a section that looks at permitted uses. So this is where we will modify what the permitted uses in the R2 district are right now to have specific uses that address the long-term athletic use. So we go into what is an athletic institutional use, which is going to be defining uses that aren't really defined well anywhere else in our code, which again creates that predictability for us as a community, because now we can kind of sit at the table and actually put a definition to a use and say, these are the allowed uses, which modifies what they could otherwise do with the property. So if they change their mind 25 years from now and said, actually, we wanted to make this residential, they'll have to go through a rezoning process to either remove the overlay district or modify the overlay district, which would again be at the same table we are now, and the city would have to evaluate through the process of engagement whether or not that's something that we would want to do and make that change within our zoning code. Okay, I'll allow DeWitt, you have not spoken yet. You can unmute yourself.
Would an architectural review board be involved in approving a final plan in an overlay district?
Great question. That is one of the elements that we have to determine within the overlay district. Right now, there are certain parameters for different construction types that require the architectural review board approval. So there's based on maybe the size of the addition, or if it's a new building that requires it. So there's different triggers within our code right now for different types of uses. We'll have to write in that same regulation within this overlay district. And that's a big thing we want to determine is what size of project or type of project within an overlay district do we want the architectural review board to look at? What kind of project that maybe doesn't include a building, but includes a lot of regrading, for example? Do we want site plan review approval from the plan commission to be required before those processes? So right now within the overlay district, when you see the draft, we're going to start out with some ideas based on the types of projects that we anticipate, based on the uses we anticipate for the districts. And then that is something that will be looked at by the community when we have that draft.
Hi, my name is Dimitri. I am a homeowner on Southmoor Drive. I'd like to go back to the question a few callers previous who asked what benefit does the project offer to the community outside of Concordia and Wash U. I can see why the overlay district has benefit to planning in Clayton going forward, but I don't think the response addressed the question. Can you speak to the benefit that this project, once it's complete, will offer us as residents?
Well, not knowing all the details of the exact project, probably not. I mean, I think in some aspects, so Concordia outlined what the project means to them as a community, well, as a long-term institutional citizen that we have, supporting the continued success of their institution is an important part for us, I feel. So I think the reorganization that they've proposed as far as creating that sense of community central to the Concordia campus, I think it inherently is a benefit to all of us if that is a benefit to their community and success. As far as some of the ideas proposed with WashU, well, we don't know exactly how the different elements are going to work, so they might be able to better speak to their goals.
I mean, I can think of an example. And again, I'm doing this on the fly, and this may not be exactly what you're talking about, but you know, there may be examples of, say, infrastructure projects that are certainly mutually beneficial. For instance, the the sidewalk on Big Bend is entirely inadequate. It's narrow, it's uneven. And if we are going to safely encourage people to use that sidewalk and we want bike and ped travel, I mean, no one in their right mind would bike in Big Bend. That's something that we would definitely look at as part of this project. To me, you know, just again, this is all hypothetical, but that's clearly a benefit to the broader community, assuming that something like that takes place. And is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking, I can see why this benefits WashU, Concordia, but no appeal yet has been made to the residents in terms of what we can offer you as residents. And I feel like I'm not sure at this point that we're going to have anyone advocating on our behalf, because it sounds like the discussion is more about this is coming down the line and we'll have some input, but there's no discussion about how it's going to benefit us. It seems like in a back and forth where there's benefit on one side, there should be an offer of benefit on the other side. And some examples might be that the 60-foot setback along Big Bend might be increased to 100 feet, and that the current plantings there might be doubled in density, or that the entrance across from the north entrance of Southmoor that goes to the parking lot area in Fontbonne might be eliminated, and you could somehow come up with a way to get the new traffic volume to the new proposed district to come in through existing entry points on the Concordia campus. Those are the sorts of things that, like, if I were hearing those, I would say, okay, so Clayton is advocating for us, the residents, and not only for the institutions.
Absolutely. And I think that hearing your suggestions, that is my goal, is to advocate for you through how we write the regulations. So those are perfect examples of what I need to hear to make sure that we codify that, write that into the code to make them do things like them. Yep. We are just out of time, so I can take one more. I know we have 3 hands online that have also already spoken. We have one, you can go right here, and then I'll if I let the people online, we have to keep it very short because we do have a second neighborhood meeting tonight and we are out of time. So I'm going to leave us for 2 more minutes between the last remaining questions.
Mine's really quick, just to add to what Dimitri said. We have a daughter who's about to turn 16, and we joke, and it's been a joke for years, as one of our neighbors said, that right turns only out of Southmoor neighborhood. It's too dangerous to take a left turn because of the traffic. So in consideration of what Dimitri said, of trying to come up with some benefits to the neighbors, really thinking about that traffic flow from the neighborhoods, it's not going to make it more detrimental than it already is.
Sally, you have 20 seconds.
Okay, yeah, I mean, to suggest that traffic go through the Demond neighborhoods is not going to be a satisfactory answer for putting more traffic through Seminary to offload it from Big Bend. So, I mean, no, thank you to the gentleman. I'm
Okay,
done.
thanks, Sally. DeWitt, you have your 30 seconds.
No, I didn't have any other comments. I was just interested in the Architectural Review Board involvement.
Okay, thank you. And you have your 20 seconds.
Yes, where I live, I'm close to the field where CBC played. And for those of you farther north, you weren't adjacent to that. I can tell you, usually where there's a school abutting athletic fields or a school abutting residential area, they're required to have downlights. my experience being near CBC when they would have night games, which is what all of the games would be at Concordia, because school's in session during the fall, winter, and spring. So there would be, the banks of lights are nothing like downlights in academic areas. They're huge and they're bright, and the area they're talking about, fields in Concordia, looks like it's about 8 times bigger than the field at CBC.
Thank you, Anne. All right, well, with that, thank you all for participating. Again, please visit engageclayton.com where you can review all of these conversations, more information, contribute. You can also contact us directly if you have questions. So my cards are downstairs by the bottom of the stairs, but feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions or comments related to this project. And again, thank you for participating tonight.